Success isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of consequences. In a world where progress stalled, they built a new future, the Longevity Principality, ensuring civilization endures.
When Pipe Dream became a state. This opening part doesn't repeat Pipe Dream. It shows the moment when an ambitious habitat discovers it has become something the world can no longer classify. I think this is the right approach, and I want to make one commitment before we start. I am not going to try to make TLP more readable by making it smaller. I'm going to make it deeper. Pipe Dream educated the reader to think in systems. TLP should reward that investment by showing what a mature system actually looks like after decades of recursive development. So from here on, every chapter should satisfy several criteria simultaneously. It advances the story. It expands the constitutional record. It explains institutional evolution. It quietly plants seeds whose importance will only become obvious in later books. It produces second and third order effects. That's the standard I'm going to hold myself to. Part 1. The consortium becomes a civilization. 16 chapters. Rather than introducing the principality, Part 1 establishes that Pipe Dream has already succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The reader arrives after decades of consolidation. Chapter 1. The day Pipe Dream stopped being an experiment. The moment historians identify as the transition from ambitious project to permanent civilization. Chapter 2. The consortium behind the principality. Redeemer is finally examined as it actually exists. Not a company, not a government, but a sovereign consortium whose accumulated enterprises made sovereignty practical long before sovereignty became legal. Chapter 3. The quiet accumulation of competence. Why institutions, not inventions, are civilization's greatest technology. Chapter 4. When health became national infrastructure. Medicine ceases being a service. It becomes public works. Chapter 5. The new strategic resource. Healthy years replace petroleum, ports and mineral deposits as the civilization's most valuable export. Chapter 6. The consortium's invisible economy. Hundreds of enterprises now cooperate without requiring central planning because constitutional incentives have recursively aligned them. Chapter 7. Municipalities that grow themselves. Pipe Dream settlements now reproduce administratively faster than conventional cities can finance expansion. Chapter 8. The ecological dividend. Restoration proves more profitable than extraction. Chapter 9. The end of disposable infrastructure. Buildings become continuously upgraded biological assets. Chapter 10. The terraform profession. Once merely engineers. Now simultaneously physicians, ecologists, emergency coordinators, constitutional officers, and keepers of civilization itself. Chapter 11. The long piece of maintenance. The civilization discovers that preventing collapse is economically superior to rebuilding afterward. Chapter 12. The consortium and the nations. Why countries increasingly negotiate with Redeemer instead of merely regulating it. Chapter 13. The first international frictions. Existing institutions begin realizing the consortium has become indispensable. Chapter 14. Recognition without permission. Markets recognize legitimacy long before diplomats do. Chapter 15. The civilization nobody intended to build. Pipe Dream becomes larger than any founding vision. Chapter 16. The constitutional century begins. History quietly changes direction. Part 2. The therapeutic commonwealth of daily life. 16 chapters. Rather than discussing medicine alone, this section shows what daily life looks like once health becomes civilization's organizing principle. Chapter 17. Living inside treatment. The environment itself replaces much of medicine. Chapter 18. Pressure as ordinary architecture. Children grow up thinking therapeutic pressure is simply how civilized buildings work. Chapter 19. Nitrox and the new atmosphere. Air becomes infrastructure. Chapter 20. Cities that heal their residents. Urban planning becomes preventative medicine. Chapter 21. The new calendar. Entire societies reorganize around circadian optimization rather than industrial schedules. Chapter 22. Sleep as constitutional infrastructure. Sleep is protected with the seriousness previous civilizations reserved for property. Chapter 23. Food after agriculture. Nutrition becomes ecosystem engineering. Chapter 24. The biological commons. Health belongs partly to everyone because everyone's behavior shapes everyone else's environment. Chapter 25. Growing old without becoming obsolete. Expertise becomes civilization's most valuable renewable resource. Chapter 26. The long careers. Citizens now expect professional lives measured in generations rather than decades. Chapter 27. Why retirement begins to disappear. Not because people are forced to work, because they remain capable of contributing. Chapter 28. Children of the Principality. Education shifts from information transfer toward judgment formation. Chapter 29. The culture of stewardship. Maintenance becomes heroic. Chapter 30. The commons of trust. Institutional trust becomes measurable public capital. Chapter 31. The social architecture of longevity. Communities themselves become medical technologies. Chapter 32. The first generation that forgot collapse. Prosperity creates its own blind spots. Part 3. The age of recursive institutions. New, 16 chapters. This is where the book begins distinguishing itself from pipe dream. Nothing fundamentally new is invented. Instead, every successful institution begins improving every other institution. Chapter 33. When good institutions begin building better institutions. The emergence of recursive governance. Chapter 34. Constitutional learning. The Charter itself develops amendment traditions without sacrificing first principles. Chapter 35. The memory layer. Institutional memory becomes operational infrastructure rather than historical archive. Chapter 36. The forensic civilization. Truth recovery becomes an everyday public utility. Chapter 37. The economics of prevention. Why crises become increasingly rare and increasingly expensive when they occur. Chapter 38. Recursive accountability. Every audit improves future governance. Chapter 39. Markets that learn. Commercial ecosystems evolve constitutional behavior. Chapter 40. The rise of trusted automation. Machines begin making narrow administrative decisions because institutions have become trustworthy enough to constrain them. Chapter 41. Professional dynasties without nepotism. Knowledge continuity replaces hereditary privilege. Chapter 42. The consortium's diplomatic core. Redeemer negotiates infrastructure before politics. Chapter 43. The quiet standardization of the world. Other societies adopt isolated consortium practices without realizing they are importing an entire constitutional philosophy. Chapter 44. Insurance discovers the future. Actuarial science becomes civilization's earliest geopolitical ally. Chapter 45. The archive expands. Every solved problem becomes civilization's permanent inheritance. Chapter 46. Competence becomes contagious. Neighboring institutions begin copying successful governance. Chapter 47. The price of success. Success attracts dependency. Chapter 48. The weight of stewardship. The consortium begins realizing it can no longer fail privately. Part 4. The predatory century. New, 16 chapters. This is where your latest insight changes everything. The principality is no longer merely admired. It becomes strategically threatening. Not because it wages war, because it renders obsolete institutions that once controlled civilization. Chapter 49. The civilization that ate markets. The consortium succeeds by absorbing dysfunction rather than competitors. Chapter 50. When prevention destroys business models. Entire industries quietly disappear. Chapter 51. The resistance economy. Powerful interests discover they profit more from fragility than resilience. Chapter 52. Post-Neo-Luddism. The first ideological movement organized around resisting optimization itself. Chapter 53. The war against competence. Disinformation, sabotage, regulatory capture, and reputational warfare converge. Chapter 54. Attacking trust. Infrastructure proves easiest to destroy by eroding confidence rather than damaging machinery. Chapter 55. The deep infiltration. Hostile actors begin targeting constitutional processes instead of physical assets. Chapter 56. The first coordinated sabotage. A cascading system's failure nearly exposes the Principality's greatest vulnerabilities. Chapter 57. Terraformers under fire. The civilization's indispensable professionals become strategic targets. Chapter 58. Emergency sovereignty. Constitutional emergency powers are tested for the first time. Chapter 59. The Dolphin's Vigil. Enhanced dolphins unexpectedly become critical participants in detecting and mitigating underwater sabotage, demonstrating that engineered companion species can become trusted institutional actors long before anyone imagines extraterrestrial missions. Chapter 60. The cost of transparency. Open societies discover that openness itself requires active defense. Chapter 61. Justice at planetary scale. REDEMR's investigative capacities begin reaching across jurisdictions. Chapter 62. The Legions of Obligation. Here we can finally examine one of REDEMR's most distinctive and morally ambiguous institutions, not an army in the conventional sense, but a vast workforce of contract-bound redeemed assets, voluntary specialists, rehabilitated elites, white-hat professionals, and individuals repaying extraordinary obligations through decades of consequential service. Their existence is simultaneously humanitarian, economically productive, politically controversial, and a constant source of external suspicion. Chapter 63. Why they called it predatory. Critics increasingly argue that the consortium does not conquer territories. It outcompetes, outlasts, and eventually absorbs functions that failing institutions can no longer perform. Whether this is benevolent evolution or constitutional imperialism becomes one of the century's defining debates. Chapter 64. The century closes without resolution. The consortium survives. Its enemies survive. The arguments intensify. And beneath the surface, countless research habitats, ecological laboratories, deep maintenance stations, therapeutic facilities, and sealed experimental environments continue their quiet work. Among them are dolphin programs, specialized primer habitats, advanced cybernetic rehabilitation units, and other projects that appear entirely ordinary within a civilization devoted to maintaining life. None is presented as the future's destiny. Yet together they form the institutional ecology from which Age of the Apes can later emerge, not as prophecy, but as one unexpected branch of a civilization that has become extraordinarily capable of attempting the previously impossible. I think this is substantially closer to the TLP you've been describing for months. Notice that we've already begun shifting from what the Principality is to what the Principality does to the rest of the world. That's a hallmark of second and third order effects, and it sets up the remaining 100+ chapters to explore how constitutional maturity, institutional recursion, geopolitical friction, and technological competence gradually reshape civilization, without prematurely turning TLP into Age of the Apes. Excellent. I actually think this is where TLP stops being Pipe Dream 2 and becomes its own civilization chronicle. Up to Chapter 64, we've essentially chronicled the rise. From here onward, we should chronicle the weight of success. Pipe Dream asked, can we build it? The Longevity Principality increasingly asks, can we survive becoming indispensable? I also think we should slow the pacing. The later parts should contain longer, denser chapters because by then the reader already knows the world. Part 8. A civilization the world can no longer ignore. Chapter 65. The recognition nobody wanted. Chapter 66. The insurance revolution. Chapter 67. When prevention becomes national security. Chapter 68. The diplomatic siege. Chapter 69. The cartels of longevity. Chapter 70. The price of refusing the Principality. Chapter 71. The sovereignty of biological infrastructure. Chapter 72. The first international treaty on health span. Chapter 73. The consortium and the nations. Chapter 74. The day Redeemer could not be sanctioned. Chapter 75. The century's new reserve asset, healthy time. Chapter 76. Civilizations begin to reorganize. Part 9. The biological commonwealth. The principality has now matured. The question is no longer whether it works. The question is whether humanity itself begins reorganizing around it. Chapter 77. Every policy is now health policy. Chapter 78. The commons of time. Chapter 79. Medicine replaces extraction. Chapter 80. Cities designed for biology. Chapter 81. The architecture of human flourishing. Chapter 82. When growth is measured in healthy years. Chapter 83. The economics of declining mortality. Chapter 84. The last retirement crisis. Chapter 85. The century workforce. Chapter 86. Education without deadlines. Chapter 87. Families across 5 generations. Chapter 88. The politics of patience. Chapter 89. Slow civilization. Chapter 90. The new wealth. Part 10. The predatory century. This is where we begin showing the reader that success attracts predators. Not comic book villains. Entire institutions. Chapter 91. The black markets of longevity. Chapter 92. Industrial espionage at depth. Chapter 93. The sabotage doctrine. Chapter 94. The attack on the galleries. Chapter 95. The terraformer's burden. Chapter 96. Emergency governance. Chapter 97. The first ecological war. Chapter 98. Information as contamination. Chapter 99. The infiltration problem. Chapter 100. The reconstruction. Chapter 101. The charter survives. Chapter 102. A civilization learns resilience. Part 11. Living machines. Here cyborgism enters almost quietly. Not because people want chrome. Because mission-critical civilization eventually demands it. Chapter 103. When expertise outlives biology. Chapter 104. The long career problem. Chapter 105. Terraformers beyond retirement. Chapter 106. Augmenting judgment. Chapter 107. The dolphin program. Chapter 108. Engineering new ecologies. Chapter 109. The first marine cyborgs. Chapter 110. Medicine becomes design. Chapter 111. Replacement without loss. Chapter 112. The living prosthetic century. Chapter 113. Bodies as continuing projects. Chapter 114. The professional who never truly retires. Part 12. The deep biosphere. The cenote is now a complete civilization. Entire ecosystems are deliberately engineered. Chapter 115. Species under stewardship. Chapter 116. The pink dolphins. Chapter 117. Ecological apprenticeship. Chapter 118. Designing closed worlds. Chapter 119. The aquarium principle. Chapter 120. Failure is never local. Chapter 121. The ethics of intervention. Chapter 122. Every organism counts. Chapter 123. The living constitution. Chapter 124. Biology as infrastructure. Chapter 125. The formation teaches again. Part 13. The long argument. By now the principality is globally influential. It becomes intellectually unavoidable. Chapter 126. The universities come underground. Chapter 127. The last great debate. Chapter 128. The critics are invited. Chapter 129. Against the biological commonwealth. Chapter 130. The limits of longevity. Chapter 131. The right to decline. Chapter 132. The right to leave. Chapter 133. The right to die. Chapter 134. The burden of continuance. Chapter 135. The Republic of Voluntary Time. Part 14, The Long Shadow. This is where we begin laying foundations for Age of the Apes without announcing it. Readers should only recognize these chapters in retrospect. Chapter 136, Habitats within Habitats. Chapter 137, Closed Ecologies at Scale. Chapter 138, The Autonomous Habitat Initiative. Chapter 139, Animals under Constitutional Care. Chapter 140, The Chimpanzee Habitat Trials. Chapter 141, The Dolphin Habitat Exchange. Chapter 142, The Terraforming Simulations. Chapter 143, Worlds That Cannot Be Repaired. Chapter 144, The Sealed Colony Doctrine. Chapter 145, Every Failure Becomes a Lesson. Chapter 146, The Long Duration Experiment. Chapter 147, A Generation Born Underground. Part 15, The Consortium's Horizon. Notice the emphasis, not space colonization, but the consortium acquiring capabilities that could someday be redirected elsewhere. Chapter 148, The Century of Competence. Chapter 149, When Every System Can Build Another. Chapter 150, Infrastructure That Designs Infrastructure. Chapter 151, The Distributed Civilization. Chapter 152, The Planetary Consortium. Chapter 153, The Last Frontier on Earth. Chapter 154, The Frontier Beyond Earth. Chapter 155, Questions Nobody Expected to Ask. Chapter 156, The Unplanned Possibility. Chapter 157, The Proposal That Changes Everything. Chapter 158, An Experiment in Another Kind of Habitat. Chapter 159, The Meeting Ends Without Consensus. Chapter 160, The Archive Opens. Epilogue. Chapter 161, The Civilization That Accidentally Invented Its Successors. I would actually change only this final title. After everything we've discussed over the past week, I no longer think The Civilization That Accidentally Invented Its Successors is the right ending because, as you clarified, the Apex and the Vanguardians do not exist yet. TLP should end one step earlier. I would instead end with Chapter 161, The Proposal Nobody Came Here to Discuss. The entire book has been about longevity, governance, medicine, ecology, sovereignty, and institutions. Then, in the final chapter, a research director, terraformer, or consortium council member quietly observes that the sealed habitat technologies, constitutional governance, autonomous ecosystems, cybernetic maintenance, and intergenerational continuity they have spent centuries refining might also solve a completely different problem. Not the problem of living longer on Earth. The problem of living somewhere else. The book ends there. No engineered chimpanzees. No Vanguardians. No Apex. No mother. Just a door opening onto an idea that no one entered the room expecting to entertain. When Super Earth, Age of the Apes begins, that proposal can then become the catalyst that launches the entire next saga, making the transition feel like an organic consequence rather than a predetermined destiny. Discussion about this episode. Recent episodes. The Longevity Principality second draft. 26 minutes ago. Pipe Dream. Reader's Digest. Notebook LM Summary. The Longevity Principality promo. 23 hours ago.
Pipe Dream. Pirate first.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today, our mission is to embark on this massive intellectual expedition into a speculative but honestly rigorously designed civilizational blueprint.
It's called Pipe Dream.
Yeah, to really grasp the depth of this text, we have to evaluate the systemic architecture behind this principality using this framework they call the 3 orders of consequences.
Because a piece of technology never just does the one thing it was designed to do.
Exactly. Okay, so let's unpack that framework for the listener. So the first order consequence is just the immediate tech.
Physical invention.
Right. You build a pressurized underwater habitat, you pump in a specific mix of oxygen, and human beings get to breathe underwater. Simple physics and biology.
But then you move to the second order consequence, which is the institutional change.
Okay, right.
Because those people living underwater are suddenly experiencing these radical shifts in their biological health. So institutions on the surface like hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, health insurance providers, they have to completely restructure how they view aging.
Oh, sure, because the baselines are all wrong now.
Exactly. They have to change how they calculate premiums, how they allocate resources. The technology essentially forces the institution to adapt to it.
But the third order consequence, that is the civilizational shift.
That is where the very fabric of reality changes.
Right. The third order is it's when a child is born into this underwater environment and they grow up believing that biological longevity, like living to 120 without any chronic disease, is just normal.
It's just a basic human expectation.
Yeah, they don't see the pressurized cave as this technological marvel. They just see it as the baseline of existence.
Right. Their culture, their art, their civil laws, their entire constitution reorganizes around that biological reality.
Not just survival, not just progress. A civilization that outperforms the world.
What the Longevity Principality exported first wasn't food, nor medicine, not governance software, or even its philosophical doctrine. It exported its longitudinal data set.
You want the code, you want the light, you face the Empress in the cyber night.
Not just survival, not just progress. A civilization that outperforms the world.
What the Longevity Principality exported first wasn't food, nor medicine, not governance software, or even its philosophical doctrine. It exported its longitudinal data set.
We entered quietly.
Initiate the final protocol.
Stone sky, where ancient water remembered what history forgot. Not seeking kingdoms, not seeking conquest, only a place where tomorrow could breathe.
The Longevity Principality. The rise of the recursive consolidation of the Redeemer Consortium.
The Longevity Principality. A civilization built on healthy time, institutions, and responsibility.
For the Longevity Principality, success isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of consequences.
We entered quietly beneath the limestone sky, where ancient water remembered what history forgot.
Pirate First's pipe dream, the Cenote Chronicles, begins.
Part 0. Entering the formation.